The microphone whined once before my father's voice filled the hall. 40 years ago, he said, I built this company with 2 hands and a truck I couldn't afford. And tonight I get to stand here and tell you that everything good in the Calder name. He paused, the way men pause when they think a room belongs to them, came out of this family. The banquet hall smelled like sterno and pot roast gravy, and the particular plastic scent of folding chairs that have been stacked in a basement since the Reagan administration. Snow ticked against the high windows. Outside, the parking lot was a sheet of January ice. Inside, 200 people from Delta County held their forks and watched my father, Dale Calder, smile into the light. I was standing near the coat rack at the back, still in my boots. In my coat pocket, my fingers were closed around a small brass medal worn smooth by 60 years of someone else's thumb. In the bag over my shoulder were 11 pages of bank records and a trust document with my name on it that I was never supposed to see. My father didn't know I was there yet. He didn't know about the bag. He thought tonight was his coronation and that I had driven 9 hours through a lake-effect blizzard to hand him the crown. My name is Dr. Maren Calder. I'm 34 years old. 6 days before that banquet, a company worth $10 billion made me an offer that changed the shape of my entire life. And 2 days before the banquet, in my dead grandmother's cabin by the lake, I found the papers that explained why my father had spent 30 years telling me my dream was a waste. What happened inside that hall is the reason I'm telling you this story. Welcome back to the Burned Bridges Club, where the people who set the fire find out the bridge was never the thing keeping them warm. If you've ever been written out of your own story by the people who were supposed to author it with love, stay with me, drop a comment, and hit subscribe, because some of you are going to need the ending of this one. Let me take you back, not to the banquet, to a kitchen 20 years before it, on a winter night when I was 14 and still believed that if I just worked hard enough, my father would see me. The dog was hit on Route 8, just past the salt barn, and somebody's kid carried it half a mile in his coat to the only house with the lights still on. Ours. I was the one who answered the door. The dog, a young shepherd mix, no collar, was breathing in that fast, shallow way that means shock, and there was a wound across its flank you could put 2 fingers into. I was 14 years old, and I didn't scream, and I didn't freeze. I got it onto the kitchen table on a feed sack, and I called the only number I knew by heart. North Shore. Humane. This is Fran. Doctor. Frances Delgado. She was 60 then. She is 79 now, and she still answers her own phone at 11 at night. There's a dog, I said. It's bad. I don't know what to do. She didn't tell me to wait for an adult. She talked me through it. Pressure here. Fold the towel like this. Don't let it roll. You've got steadier hands than half the people I work with, Maren. Keep them steady now. By the time she pulled into our driveway in her rusted Suburban, the bleeding had slowed and the dog was still alive. And I was on my knees on the linoleum with my arms soaked to the elbow. My father stood in the kitchen doorway the whole time. He never came closer. When the dog was stabilized and loaded, when Fran had squeezed my shoulder and called me Doc for the first time as a joke that I would spend 20 years trying to make true, my father looked at the blood on the floor and the blood on my sleeves and said one thing. That's a mess you're going to clean up before your mother sees it. Not good job, not are you okay. A mess. That's what saving something looked like, from where he stood. A mess on his floor. Let me tell you who my father is, because you need to understand that he is not a monster. That would be too easy. Dale Calder built Calder Builders out of nothing. His own father drank the family farm into the ground and died owing money to everyone in 3 townships. And Dale decided at 19 that he would never be a man who owed anyone anything. So he learned framing, then concrete, then everything. And he put up half the new houses in Delta County between 1985 and 2010. He believed in tangible things. A wall you could lean on. A foundation that would hold. work you could touch. And he believed that anything you could not touch, a diploma, a dream, a calling, was a story rich people told to keep poor people busy. My mother, Carol, kept the books for the business. She was good at it, quietly, the way a lot of women of her generation were good at things nobody thanked them for. She had a way of agreeing with my father that wasn't quite agreement, a half second of stillness, a tightening at the corner of her mouth. And then she'd say, "Your father's right," and pass the potatoes. For 30 years, I mistook that stillness for nothing. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. My sister Bryn is 3 years older than me. Bryn understood early what I never could, that in our house, the way to be loved was to want exactly what was offered. Bryn never wanted out. She wanted the front office of Calder Builders and a husband from the next county over, and her name on the Christmas card under Calder and Voss. She got all three. She was the good daughter. I was the one who answered the door at 11 at night with blood on my sleeves. There was one person in that family who saw me. My grandmother, Dale's mother, Ada Calder. She ran a boarding kennel out behind her lake cabin for 40 years, 12 runs and a whelping room and a hand-lettered sign she repainted every spring. Ada smelled like cedar shavings and Salem cigarettes, and she had opinions about everything, especially her son. The night of the shepherd, after everyone went to bed, Ada called the house. I don't know how she heard so fast. In a county that size, news travels through the phone lines like weather. She didn't ask if the dog made it. She knew it would. She asked me one question. "You scared when you were doing it?" "No," I said. I knew what to do. I heard her exhale her cigarette. "That's the thing they're going to try to take from you," she said. The knowing. Don't let them. A week later, she pressed something into my hand at her kitchen table. A small brass medal. A man in a robe with birds on his shoulders. Saint Francis, patron of animals. It had been her mother's. "Rub his head when you're scared and can't show it," she said. "Works better than your father's God, anyway." I still have it. It's in my pocket as I tell you this. It was in my pocket at the banquet, too. Hold on to that. I'll tell you the receipt. The itemized list of what it cost to become myself in that family. Because I kept it the way you keep receipts, not out of bitterness, but because someday somebody asks you to prove it, and you want to be able to. I was 17 the night I said it at dinner. Pork chops, applesauce, the green beans Bryn liked. I put the Michigan State acceptance letter next to my plate. Pre-veterinary studies. A partial academic award. My father read the first line and set it down like it had a smell. 8 years, he said. 4 of college, then 4 more of vet school. For what? To put your arm in a cow? To be a veterinarian, Dad. We've got a business right here that's got your name on it if you want it. Real work. Or this, he tapped the letter. This is a waste. 8 years and $100,000 to come back here and do for free what you'll do for nothing anyway, because there's no money in animals in a county like this. He looked at my mother. Tell her. My mother had that stillness. Half a second. Then, your father's right, Maren. It's a lot of money to gamble. Bryn reached for the applesauce and said nothing, which in our house was its own kind of vote. There's money set aside, I said. Grandma told me. She said there's money for school. The table went very quiet. My father looked at me for a long moment, and I watched something move behind his face that I didn't have a name for yet. Your grandmother's getting old, he said finally. She says a lot of things. There's no money, Maren. You go chasing this. You go on your own dime. I want you to hold that sentence, because it's the hinge the whole story swings on. There's no money. He said it to my face, in his kitchen, with his wife and his older daughter watching, 8 months before his mother died. Here is the receipt. I worked the desk at the North Shore shelter on weekends through high school. Fran paid me in experience and cash from the register when she could. I left for Michigan State on a Greyhound because nobody offered to drive me, and the only person who came to see me off was my grandmother, who slipped $300 and a wax paper sandwich into my hands at the station and said, "Don't you dare clean any blood off your sleeves for those people. You earned that blood." 4 years of undergrad. I waited tables, I cleaned kennels, I drew blood at a clinic in Lansing for $9 an hour. I made the dean's list 6 semesters out of 8, and I called home once a month, and the calls lasted 4 minutes, and nobody asked what I was learning. 8 months into my freshman year, my grandmother had a stroke and died in the back bedroom of the lake cabin before I could get home. I missed it by a day. My father handled everything. He was the executor. I remember thinking, in my grief, what a relief it was that someone responsible was handling everything. Then 4 years of veterinary school. $211,000 in loans. I ate rice and frozen peas. I scrubbed in at 6 in the morning. I was, those years, the happiest and the most exhausted I have ever been, and I was completely alone. And I told myself that was just the cost of the dream, and I would pay it gladly. I invited my parents to my graduation. My mother said, "It's an awful long drive in May, and your father's knee." My father texted, "Congrats. Don't come back broke." I walked across the stage with my name read out loud, Maren Calder, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, into a hall full of families holding flowers. The 2 seats I had reserved for my parents were empty. Dr. Fran Delgado was in the 4th row. She'd driven 6 hours. She was holding a piece of poster board that said, in block marker, Doc Calder. She was the only person clapping who knew my middle name was my grandmother's. That was the last time anyone in my blood family celebrated me for 9 years. If you've ever clapped for yourself in an empty row, I see you. It is a special kind of tired, being your own standing ovation. If that's you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And subscribe. Because what my father did with my grandmother's money is the part I still can't quite say out loud without my hands going cold. Let's keep going. I built a life. That's the part the title doesn't tell you. I took a job at a low-cost clinic and shelter network across 3 rural counties, the kind of place where people bring you an animal they love and a wallet that can't cover what it needs. That's where the whole thing started, though I didn't know it was a thing yet. It was just a problem. A trauma case would come in, hit by a car, caught in a fence, mauled, and I'd have a body that needed major surgical repair and an owner with $40 and a shelter budget that ran out in October. Sutures take time. Time is anesthesia. Anesthesia is money. And infection is the thing that kills them after you've already saved them. I started improvising. A tissue adhesive here, a layered closure there. Then I started keeping a notebook of what worked, because I keep notebooks, because a woman told me when I was 14 that the knowing was the thing they'd try to take. Over 6 years, in a converted storage room behind the clinic, with a microscope I bought used and a benchtop centrifuge I won at a veterinary auction, I worked out a sealant, a regenerative matrix, I'll spare you the chemistry, that you could apply to a surgical site to close it, prevent infection, and accelerate healing in animals, fast, cheap, and without a perfect sterile field. I tested it on the cases that walked through my door, the ones who had no other option anyway, and I documented everything, every single time, the way Fran taught me on a kitchen floor. By the time I presented a poster at a regional veterinary surgical conference, my data set was 300 procedures deep, with a post-operative complication rate I had to recheck 4 times because I didn't believe it myself. I called my mother once a month, the whole time. The calls lasted 4 minutes. She talked about Bryn's kitchen renovation and the price of heating oil and my father's knee, and she never once asked what I was building in the storage room behind the clinic. So I stopped offering. You learn to stop feeding information to people who only ever ask you for things. I sent money at Christmas, $500 every year, into a house that had told me there was no money for me. I understand now why I did it. I was still auditioning, still hoping that if I was generous enough, loyal enough, good enough. My father would one day look up from his foundation and see that the thing I'd built could hold weight too. Fran is the one who named it. We were sitting in her kitchen, the same kitchen, 20 years on, her hands spotted now, and she said, "You keep them all at arm's length, you know. Everybody but me and the animals. That's because the animals never told me my life was a waste," I said. She didn't laugh. "Your grandmother told me something once," she said, "and I never knew what she meant. She said, 'Dale took something from that girl, and one day it's going to come out, and God help him when it does.'" Fran looked at me. "You ever figure out what she meant?" I hadn't, but I was about to. The phone call came on a Tuesday in December, a 312 area code, Chicago. "Dr. Calder, my name is Priya Anand. I'm Chief Science Officer at Brightwell Animal Health." A pause that I would later understand was the pause of a woman used to being recognized. "We've been following the data on your surgical sealant since the conference. I'll be direct. We'd like to talk about licensing it, and we'd like to talk about you." Brightwell Animal Health. $10 billion. The largest animal health company in North America. The kind of company whose products are in every vet clinic in the country, including the 3 rural ones where I'd spent 9 years working for less than my law school friends made in a month. I flew to Chicago on a Thursday. Glass tower, a conference room on the 31st floor, a table you could land a plane on. 9 people. A whiteboard already covered in my formula, copied from my published abstract. They wanted an exclusive license on the patent. They also wanted me, Vice President of Surgical Innovation, a new division, my name on the door. The offer was $420,000 a year in salary, plus equity vesting over 4 years, plus milestone payments on the license. The total package, Priya Anand said, sliding a single sheet of paper across that enormous table, would land north of $6.8 million. I read the number. Then I read it again. Not because I doubted it, but because some part of me was 14 years old and waiting for a man in a kitchen doorway to call it a mess. I signed on a Friday. I didn't post anything. I emailed Fran 2 words. "We did it." She wrote back, "You did it. Don't let one soul rewrite that sentence." I did not call my father. I did not call my mother. I did not call Bryn. I had learned by then that the news would find them on its own. In a county that small, it travels like weather. It took 11 days. A trade outlet ran it first, Rural Shelter Vets Surgical Breakthrough acquired by Brightwell. And then a business magazine picked it up because small-town vet to multi-millionaire is a headline that writes itself. And somewhere in there, a fortune writer used the word millionaire next to my name, and my mother saw it on Facebook within the hour. My phone rang the next morning at 7:14. The caller ID said, "Dad." My father had not called me first in 9 years. "Maren." His voice was warm. It was a temperature I genuinely could not remember hearing him use toward me. "Your mother showed me the article. $6 million. My God. We had no idea you were doing all that." "You didn't ask," I said. A half-second of silence. He recovered fast. He always did. "Listen, the timing on this is something. The company's turning 40 this year." 40 years, Maren. "And we're throwing a thing. A banquet, end of the month, the whole county. Chamber of Commerce is making it their small business night. I want you there. I want to honor the family, all of us. And Bryn's got some things she wants to run by you." I caught it instantly. The merge. The private ask welded to a public event, because it is very hard to say no to your father in front of 200 people who watched you grow up. He wasn't inviting me home. He was building a stage. "I'll come," I said. "I'm bringing Fran Delgado." A pause. 4 full seconds. "Why her?" "Because she's family to me." I heard him decide it wasn't worth the fight. "The more the merrier," he said, in a voice stretched thin over the words. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed for a while. the brass metal warm in my fist. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even hopeful. I was just tired of being surprised by a pattern that had run without a single variation for 34 years. I called Fran. "Something's off," I said. "He's never combined a private ask with a public event. He's never honored anything in his life that didn't have his name on the deed." Fran's voice went dry as chalk. "Dale Calder doesn't build a stage unless he's already decided who's standing on it. Question is whether he told you the part where you write the check." He had. I just hadn't read it yet. 2 days later, Bryn called. "Mare." Nobody but Bryn called me Mare. "So happy for you, truly. Listen." And I told Dad I'd run this by you gently. The business has had a couple rough years. Lumber, interest rates, you know how it is. We took on some debt to keep the crews working. A breath. The bank's getting nervous. And Dad mentioned, at the banquet, it'd be such a beautiful thing if you were able to put something into the company. Family helping family. $250,000 would steady the whole ship. "Bryn," I said, "I never said I'd put money into Calder Builders." I know. Nobody's saying you did. It's just, it would mean everything to Dad. To do it that night. In front of everybody. The torch passing back into the family. She laughed, a little too brightly. "He's even got a part in the program for it." There it was. He had written my lines. He'd ordered the cake before he asked if I'd be at the party. "How much debt, Bryn?" A pause. "I don't know the exact. How much?" 180 against the building, she said quietly. And the line of credits about maxed. I thanked her and hung up and sat with it. 180,000 against a building worth less every year, in a county that wasn't growing, run by a man who thought a balance sheet was something rich people invented to feel clever. And he wanted $250,000 from the daughter whose education he had called a waste. I called Fran one more time. "He's building a stage," I said, "and Bryn's already selling tickets to my part of the show. What are you going to do?" "Show up," I said, "but I'm writing my own program. And first, I want to check one thing." "What's that?" "They're selling Grandma's cabin. Closing's next month. Bryn asked me weeks ago if I wanted anything out of it before the estate company hauls it off." I looked out the window at the snow. Grandma kept everything. 40 years of everything. If my father was willing to build a whole banquet around a lie, I want to know what else he's been managing behind a locked door. Fran was quiet a moment. "Maren, be careful what you go looking for in that cabin." "I'm a shelter vet, Fran. I've spent 20 years working with things that bite when you reach into the dark. Cold hands. Steady hands." I drove up to the lake the day before the banquet. Ada's cabin sat where it had always sat, low to the water. The kennel runs out back, collapsed under the snow. The estate company hadn't gotten to the inside yet. It smelled like cedar and cold and, faintly, impossibly, still like Salem cigarettes. Her reading glasses were still on the kitchen table where she'd left them the night she died, as if she'd just stepped out to check the dogs. I knew her system because she'd shown me when I was a girl. Ada didn't trust banks with paper, and she didn't trust her son with anything. She kept the things that mattered in an old green tackle box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, behind the extra blankets, where Dale, who never once in his life put away a blanket, would never look. The tackle box was still there. Inside, her marriage certificate. A photo of me at 14 with my arms around a shepherd mix, a dog I'd never seen a picture of that someone had taken without my knowing. The deed to the cabin. And, at the bottom, folded in a freezer bag the way careful people protect important paper, a sheaf of documents held with a rusted clip. The top sheet was a trust instrument. The Ada Calder Education Trust, established 11 years before her death, funded with $140,000. The sale of 2 adjacent lake lots she'd owned outright. The named beneficiary, in the cramped legal font, was Maren Calder, for the purpose of post-secondary and professional education. The named trustee was Dale R. Calder. Behind it, a bank passbook and a single page of transfer records. I sat down on the edge of my dead grandmother's bed. The room was very cold and very still. I read the transfer page 3 times. 4 months after Ada died. 4 months after I sat in a dorm room grieving and grateful that someone responsible was handling everything. The trust had been dissolved. The $140,000 earmarked for my education had been moved in a single transfer into a business operating account. The memo line, typed by a man who would never imagine his daughter standing in a cold cabin reading it 11 years later, said, Calder Builders. Q3 shortfall. There's no money, Maren. He'd said it to my face 8 months before she died, when the trust already existed, and then she died, and he became the trustee, and he took the money my grandmother set aside for my dream, and he poured it into his concrete, and he let me sign $211,000 in loans. And he called my degree a waste while standing on a foundation I had unknowingly helped pay for. There was one more thing in the freezer bag. A letter in Ada's hand, sealed. Never sent. The front said only, for Maren, when she's a doctor. I'm not going to read you that letter. Some things you only get to keep if you don't spend them on a video. But I'll tell you, it ended with a line I now know my grandmother meant as both a blessing and a warning. The knowing was always yours, baby. So is everything you build with it. Don't let your father stand on your stage and take the bow. My hands were not shaking. They were steady. I folded the documents back into the freezer bag, put the brass metal back in my pocket, and called Fran from the cabin steps with the lake going silver in the last of the light. I read her the trust. I read her the transfer line. She was silent for a long time. He stole $140,000 from you, she said finally, without ever once touching your wallet. He did. You could put that on the table tomorrow night, she said carefully. In front of the whole county, the chamber, the pastor, every man who ever shook his hand. I could, but you won't use it as a knife. No, I said. I'm going to use it as a light. He's going to stand up there and tell 200 people the family made me. He's going to ask me to bankroll the thing he built with my grandmother's money. And when he's done, I'm going to stand up and turn the lights on. No screaming. Just the truth, in the order it actually happened. Fran exhaled. And then? And then I'm going to give the money away. Properly this time. There's a kid out there right now answering a door with blood on her sleeves, and her father's telling her it's a mess. I watched the lake. I'm going to fund a thing, a surgical access fund and a scholarship, run through the county. No connection to any family business, any building, any debt. Free trauma surgeries for animals whose people can't pay, and tuition for one rural kid a year who wants to do what I do. You're naming it after yourself, Fran said. No, I'm naming it after Ada. The silence on the line stretched out long enough to hold weight. Cassandra, Fran started, then caught herself, laughed wetly. Listen to me. Maren, that woman is going to be insufferable in heaven. I called the county extension office and the community foundation that afternoon. $75,000 in seed funding, administered independently, my grandmother's name on it, paperwork to follow Monday. By the time the sun was fully down, the bones of it were real. Tomorrow my father would get his stage. But the program belonged to me. If you've ever found, in a box, in a cold room, the proof of a thing you always felt but were told you imagined, tell me in the comments. And subscribe. Because what happened in that banquet hall is the reason I needed you to understand the cabin first. Back to it. The Hartley Eagles Lodge had been strung with 40 years of Calder builders and photographs. My father, young and lean against a half-framed house. My father with a county commissioner. My father at a ribbon cutting. My father, my father, my father. A banner over the stage read, "Celebrating 40 years of Calder." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Delta County Small Business of the Year." There was a cake. Of course there was a cake. My mother met us at the door in a navy dress, greeting the room like a campaign manager. She saw me and opened her arms, and the hug was firm and brief and felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced where to put her hands. Her eyes flicked to Fran behind me, and the warmth dropped half a degree, then climbed back. She said nothing. Bryn worked the room. My sister, the one in Chicago, the millionaire, her husband trailing with 2 drinks. My father stood near the stage holding a folder, in the good suit he wore to funerals and bank meetings, accepting handshakes like a man receiving tribute. There was a printed program on every chair. I picked one up. Item 6, Special Recognition, a Calder investment in our future. I had not been consulted about Item 6. My father crossed to me. Up close, he smelled like the same drugstore aftershave he'd worn my whole life. He put a hand on my shoulder, which he had not done since I was a child, and leaned in, and what he said, quietly, warmly, certain it was the master stroke, was this: "Whatever you've got, you got it from us. Don't forget that tonight. Make your old man proud." I looked at him. I smiled. I nodded. And I did not say a single word. Dinner was pot roast and the kind of sheet cake that's mostly air. I sat with Fran and an old contractor named Buddy Lehman who'd poured foundations with my father for 30 years and kept calling my work the dog glue thing. Across the room, my mother moved table to table. I caught the fragments. We always knew Maren was special. She gets her grit from her father. We sacrifice so much to give those girls every chance. Every sentence, a small polished stone in a wall she'd been building for years. The wall that said the Calders made Maren. Fran put her hand on my arm. Steady. Same hand. 20 years later, anchoring me against the same current. "You doing all right?" she murmured. Waiting. For what? For him to say it all. Every word. He has to take the bow in front of all of them before I turn the lights on. They need to hear his version first. Then mine. The pot roast was dry. The coffee was scorched. My father took the stage to applause that he soaked in like sun. He talked for 10 minutes. 2 hands and a truck. Foundations that hold. Family that stays. And then he turned, and he found me at my table, and his voice went soft and proud, in a way that made my mother dab her eyes on cue. "Some of you saw the news," he said. "My daughter Maren, Dr. Maren now. She went off and did something none of us understood at the time. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't believe in it. I thought it was a waste." Warm chuckle from the room. The honesty trick, the same one my mother used. But a father's job is to build a foundation strong enough that your kids can build something taller on top of it. And tonight, everything my daughter is, everything the Calder name has become, it all came up out of this family. "Maren, honey, come on up. Tell these good people about the investment you're making in us." 200 faces turned to me. The banner, the cake, the program, with item 6. The stage my father built, the lines he wrote, the check he was certain I'd cut in front of God and the Chamber of Commerce. I stood. I smoothed my jacket. I walked to the podium with my grandmother's medal in one fist and a freezer bag in my bag. And my father stepped aside with a smile that said, "I'm letting you borrow my moment." "Thank you, Dad," I said. "And thank you all for being here." I let the room settle. I do have an announcement tonight. But before I make it, I'd like to set a few things straight. Because most of you have only ever heard one version of my story, and you deserve the real one. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. My father's smile held, but his eyes narrowed a fraction. My father just told you he didn't believe in vet school. That's true. What he didn't tell you is the word he used. He used it at our dinner table when I was 17, with my acceptance letter next to my plate. He said it was a waste. I kept my voice level. 20 years of telling people their animal isn't going to make it teaches you to deliver hard things steady. He told me there was no money for school, that I'd be on my own. And I was. I took out $211,000 in loans. I paid every dollar of it back last year. Alone. The murmurs started. Low. Delta County processes shock quietly. He just told you everything came up out of this family. I looked at him. Dad, I need you to hear this part, because it's the part you've managed for 11 years and I only learned 2 days ago. My father's hand found the back of the nearest chair. His knuckles went pale. My grandmother, your mother, Ada Calder. Most of the older folks in this room knew her. She ran the kennel out on the lake for 40 years. A few nods, soft, from the back where the farmers sat. Before she died, Ada sold 2 of her lots and she set up a trust. $140,000. For my education, she named me. And she named one trustee to look after it. I let the silence do its work. 4 months after she died, that trust was dissolved. The entire $140,000 was transferred, in a single payment, into the Calder Builders operating account. The memo line says, Q3 shortfall. I took the freezer bag out of my bag. I did not wave it. I set it on the podium, flat, where the front row could see the green trust document through the plastic. The trustee, I said, was my father. The silence in that hall was not church quiet. It was void quiet, the kind where you can hear the radiator tick and the ice settle in 200 water glasses and the breath catch in 200 throats. My father's mouth opened. That money kept the crews working, he said, and his voice was not the warm voice anymore. That money saved 12 men's jobs in 13. You want to stand here and... I'm not finished, Dad. He stopped. His mouth stayed open a moment, then closed. You're right that it saved the business, I said. I'm sure it did. What you took wasn't yours to choose with. It was hers, and it was mine. And you told a 17-year-old to her face that it didn't exist. You let me eat rice for 4 years. You let me sign loans that took me a decade to clear. And then you stood on this stage tonight with the photographs and the cake, and you asked me to give you $250,000 to save the company you built, partly with my grandmother's stolen money. While telling these people the family made me, my mother stood up. Maren, that's not... Your father was trying to... Mom. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I watched her stillness crack open down the middle. You kept the books. You knew what $140,000 moving in one transfer looked like. You posted it, didn't you? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her face answered, and Bryn's face answered next to her, and across the room 200 people who'd come for pot roast and a feel-good ribbon cutting watched a family come off its foundation slowly, quietly, and completely. I turned to Bryn. You asked me for $250,000 to steady the ship. The ship's taking on water because of a $180,000 debt nobody at this table will say out loud. I'm not your bailout, Bryn. I never agreed to be on the program. Bryn looked at her plate. Then I looked back at my father, and my voice softened because I couldn't help it. He was 63 years old, and he was holding a chair to stay upright. And the worst thing about him was that he was not a monster. He was a frightened man who decided 30 years ago that the only things real were the things he could pour, and who had never once been brave enough to be wrong out loud. You spent my whole life telling me what I loved was a waste, I said, quiet now, just to him, though the whole room heard it. And the truth is, you were scared of it. Because you can't pour it, and you can't own it, and you can't put your name on the deed. So you tried to bury it. You buried the money, and you buried the truth. And you stood up here tonight to bury it one more time under a banner with your name on it. I picked up the freezer bag. But the knowing was always mine. She told me that when I was 14. I finally believe her. I turned to the room, and I changed the lights. My father told you I'm here to make an investment in the family. He's right. I just want to be the one to say what it is. A murmur, then stillness. I'm establishing the Maren Calder Fund, $75,000 to start, administered by the Delta County Community Foundation. Anybody can verify it Monday morning. It does two things. It pays for emergency surgeries for animals whose people can't afford to save them. Right here, through the North Shore Shelter. And it sends one rural kid from this county to veterinary school every year. The kind of kid who answers the door at 11 at night with blood on her sleeves because she already knows what to do. I looked at Fran. She was at our table, both hands flat on the tablecloth, staring at me with an expression I will carry to my own grave. Fran Delgado is going to chair it, I said. Because when I was 14 and my own family looked at a dying dog on the kitchen table and saw a mess on the floor, Fran drove through the dark and called me Doc. She showed up to my graduation when those two seats sat empty. She is the reason there's anyone up here to give anything away. The applause came from the back first. The farmers, the people who'd called Fran Delgado at midnight for 40 years and found her at the gate by sunrise. It built forward through the room. It was nothing like the applause they'd given my father. That one had been polite. This one was real. My father did not clap. He sat down in a folding chair, slowly, like something inside him had finally stopped holding. And then my mother did the thing I never planned for. She stood up. Her hands were shaking. She looked, not at me, but at the room, at the neighbors, the chamber, the women she'd run bake sales with for 30 years. And she said, in a voice that barely carried, but that the void quiet hall caught every word of, I posted the transfer. Her chin trembled. I knew what it was, and I told my daughter her father was right, when I knew he wasn't, because it was easier than living in a house where I'd said otherwise. She turned to me. I should have driven you to that bus station. I should have come to your graduation. I have been quiet for 34 years, Maren, and I want to say one true thing before I lose the nerve. Your grandmother was right about you, and I was a coward. She sat down hard. My father did not look at her. Bryn was crying without making any sound. I should tell you, I felt triumph. I didn't. I felt the strange, hollow clarity of a surgery that went exactly right and came 9 years too late. I picked up my grandmother's medal off the podium where I'd set it without realizing, and I closed it in my fist. I didn't come here to punish anyone, I said to the room. I came because my father invited me, and for about 1 second on the phone, I let myself think it might be real. I looked at him one last time. He was staring at the floor, the way I'd seen him stare at the floor my whole childhood, except now he was the one with blood on his hands and a mess he'd have to clean before anyone could see it. 40 years of Calder, I said, nodding up at the banner. It's a good company, Dad. You built something real. I just won't be standing on it. And you don't get to stand on me. I stepped down. Fran was already up, purse in hand, ready to walk beside me the way she'd walked beside me since I was 14. Beside. Never behind. Nobody stopped us. At the door, I turned around once. For anybody in this room with a kid who wants something you don't understand, I said, let them go. You don't have to get it. Just don't stand in the doorway. And whatever you do, I looked at my father. Don't touch the money somebody set aside to help them fly. I pushed the door open. The January cold hit my face like a clean thing. The parking lot was black ice, and the sky over the lake was thick with stars, and my breath went up in front of me like something finally leaving. We sat in my car a minute before pulling out, the heater roaring, the lodge windows still bright behind us. Through the glass, you could see people standing, talking, some of them looking toward the door I'd just walked through. How do you feel? Fran asked, the way she used to ask after a surgery I shouldn't have been old enough to do. Like a chronic case finally got managed, I said. She laughed, short and dry, the Fran Delgado laugh. That's my girl. My phone buzzed. Bryn. I declined. It buzzed again. Mom. I held it a second longer this time, then declined. A third buzz, a text. Dad. It said, "Your grandmother would be ashamed of how you did that." I read it twice. Then a fourth buzz, a second text, from the same number, sent 40 seconds later, like a man typing against his own hands. No, she wouldn't. She'd be proud. I'm the one she'd be ashamed of. I'm sorry, Maren. I should have said it 11 years ago. I sat with that for a long moment in the dark. Then I typed back, "Okay, Dad. Not forgiveness. Not yet." Forgiveness takes more than one text in a frozen parking lot, but it was a place to put my feet. I started the engine and pulled out onto the lake road, and the lodge shrank in the mirror, and Delta County rolled past in the dark. The same fields, the same fences, the same county I'd been driving through since I was 16. Same roads, different driver. Fran rode shotgun the way she always had, one arm on the door, watching the road, saying nothing unless something needed saying. 20 years ago, she'd quizzed me on anatomy between barn calls at midnight. Tonight, she just watched the snow come down in the headlights, and after a few miles, she said, "Your mother surprised me." Me too. Took her 34 years. Some foundations take a long time to crack, I said. Doesn't mean the crack isn't the most honest thing in the building. Here's how it settled, in case you need to know that it does. Calder Builders downsized that spring. My father couldn't get the $250,000 he'd written into the program, and the bank doesn't run on family loyalty. He sold the equipment yard and laid off the two younger crew and kept the company alive at a third its size. Framing additions and pole barns, his name still on the truck. He stopped going to the chamber dinners. For the first time in 40 years, Dale Calder was a man in the audience instead of a man at the podium. He calls me every other Sunday now. Short calls. He asks about the weather in Chicago and the work. He never asks for money. And he never, not once, puts my mother on the line without asking me first if I want to talk to her. My mother left him for 4 months that summer. Stayed with a cousin in Marquette. They're back together now, in a quieter house, and from what I can tell, she stopped going still and quiet when she disagrees. She calls me on her own. The first call, she didn't ask me for anything, and I had to sit down because I couldn't remember the last time my mother called, just to hear my voice. Bryn and her husband separated, then didn't, then started counseling. Not because of the business, but because of everything the business had been hiding. She wrote me a letter, a real one, on paper. It said she'd spent her whole life being the daughter who wanted what was offered, and she'd just realized she didn't know what she actually wanted, and she was sorry she'd never once asked me what I'd built. I wrote back, "We're not close, but we're honest now, which we never were before. And honesty is a foundation you can pour the rest on later." The Ada Calder Fund took in another $51,000 in donations by summer, a lot of it from the people who'd been in that hall. The first surgery it paid for was a beagle named Rooster, hit by a truck out on Route 8, the same road as the Shepherd, half a mile from the house where I once answered the door. The first scholarship went to a 17-year-old named Daniela Reyes, whose father drives a snowplow and told her vet school was a fantasy. She starts at Michigan State in the fall. She wrote me a note. "Dr. Calder, my dad says it's not real money for not real work, but you did it, so I'm going to do it too, and I'm not going to let anyone tell me what I love is a waste." I taped it to my office wall in Chicago, next to a piece of poster board that says Doc Calder in 20-year-old marker, next to a small brass medal of a man in a robe with birds on his shoulders. At Brightwell, my sealant went into field trials across 2,400 surgeries in the first year. The complication rate held. A clinic in Montana emailed to say it had saved a working dog that would have died on the table, a dog that herds the cattle that feed a family. I print those emails. I keep them. The work is the point. The work was always the point. Here's what I know now, after all of it. The people who raised you don't own what you build. If they believed in you, thank them. Really thank them, the way I should have thanked Fran sooner. If they didn't, build it anyway, and build it bigger. And don't you dare make yourself smaller so they can feel tall. And if they ever try to climb up onto your stage and take the bow, hand them a chair in the audience, turn on the lights, and keep talking. My grandmother set aside $140,000 so a girl with blood on her sleeves could become a doctor. A man took it and poured it into concrete and called the dream a waste. And in the end, the dream paid off all the debt, funded the fund, and put a 17-year-old on a bus to vet school. And the concrete needed bailing out. The knowing was always mine. It was always yours, too. Don't let anyone bury it. That's my story. One lodge, one banquet, 200 people who heard the truth for the first time. If this reminded you that what you built belongs to you, not to the ones who tried to stop you, and not to the ones who tried to claim you once you'd already won, do me a favor and send it to the person you're thinking of right now. You know who they are. Tell me in the comments. Has anyone ever tried to take credit for something you built completely alone? And if you've ever found the proof, in a box, in a cold room, that you weren't crazy after all, I especially want to hear from you. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, here at the Burned Bridges Club.